Hello, welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan.
Hey, Guthrie.
Hi. So, today's topic is all about multitasking.
Yes.
What it is, why it's good, why it's maybe bad, and it's a topic that actually we've been doing a little bit of research about.
Yeah, we have. Actually, I've changed my mind a little bit about it based on getting myself updated on some of the research. So this will be the latest and the greatest.
Why don't you just spend 25 seconds talking about the latest course that we just published, just because it will help frame this discussion.
Yeah, so we just published a course recently called The Science of Productivity, and in there we have a section on multitasking and about how multitasking might harm your productivity, and then the situations in which it might not harm your productivity. And that's why, in getting ready for that course, I was updating myself on all the latest research on it. So then I thought, hey, we should do a podcast on it.
So let's start with why would productivity and multitasking be interconnected? What is the nexus between those two?
It's funny that you would ask that, because to me that's like so obvious. Why would you even need to ask that? But I think
I don't think that's obvious to most people.
Yeah, see, that just shows my inherent bias, I guess. Well, the idea. I mean, and in fact, I think some people would say that when you multitask, you're more productive because you're getting multiple things done at once. And I think for those of us who are, psychologists, we would say, oh, no. If you try to do more than one thing at a time, your productivity is going to suffer. So, in the field of psychology, for a long time, psychologists don't call it multitasking. They actually use the term task switching, which I think makes the point that I used to say there is no such thing as multitasking, and I think in some of my books I even have that in print. Multitasking doesn't exist. It's all switching tasks. So you're switching from one to another. But I've changed my mind on that.
Yeah. So let's define some terms very quickly. When you say productivity, what do you mean by productivity?
By productivity, I give a definition in the course, but do I remember what it is?
Well,
productivity is...
Yes, it's fine.
I can just talk off the top of my head, you mean. Productivity is the idea that you are doing high-quality work in an efficient way. And in our course, I specifically say we're focusing on productivity of mental, not physical tasks. Because you could talk about, being productive when in chopping wood for your wood stove or your fireplace, right? And being productive in how you do that. Or you can talk about being productive in, an information type job. And most of the course focuses on the latter. So we're assuming we're talking about being productive and getting work done where the work you do has to do with thinking and information and
cognitive work as opposed to strenuous.
As opposed to strenuous physical labor. Yep. So the idea of being productive means that you're able to get a lot done of a high quality as efficiently as possible in as short amount of time as possible.
Well, that makes sense.
That's how I'm defining it.
There's nothing wrong with your definition.
And so the idea is, if you want to be productive, what do you do or don't do? What should you do or not do about multitasking, about doing more than one thing?
Well, now let's define multitasking.
Okay, multitasking is doing more than one thing at a time.
Well, right now I am listening and I'm seeing with my eyes.
Well, see, that's the thing. I think when psychologists would say, well, there is no such thing as multitasking, it's just task switching, then you start, it's like, well, what does that mean really? Do you mean you can't think about two things at the same time? Or are you talking about the fact that you can't see something while you're hearing something, or you can't hear something while you're thinking about something? I mean, what's the combination? And I think it's in getting more detailed about that and studying the research on this more closely is what made me start to change what I was saying. So certainly we know that humans can do two things at the same time. Okay, like you just said, you are listening to me, you are thinking about what I'm saying, and you're maybe looking at the audio controls on your screen and just monitoring that, it still appears to be recording, right? And you're doing all of that at the same time. Now, technically, are you doing that at exactly the same time? No, probably you are doing some switching. So in terms of listening to what I'm saying and then thinking about your response to that, you probably are switching back and forth between switching your attention. And I think that has a lot to do with it. It has to do with attention, switching your attention back and forth between what I'm saying and what you're thinking about what I'm saying. I do think it's possible for you to be listening or even talking and visually monitoring. If it's just a matter of visually noticing that the green bar is moving on the audio controls, I think in that case, you really can multitask. You can do those two things simultaneously. So I think it's hard for us to know when we talk about multitasking whether the particular thing we're talking about is actually being task switched or is actually being multitasked. But the idea is that if you're doing more than one thing at a time, if you're doing that consciously, all right, I think that's the real key thing, because we know that our brains are processing information unconsciously all the time. We're not aware of it, and it's fully, you are breathing while you are listening to me. And that wouldn't even be considered multitasking. I guess it could be, but it's so automatic that, does not require your attention. And so, we know we can multitask if we include that. If we don't include that, if we say, okay, but that's unconscious and that's automatic, and therefore, we take that out of the equation, I still think there are things that we can consciously do, as long and what the researchers in this area say is that it is multitasking, and you can multitask if at least one of the tasks is something that's very well practiced, well rehearsed, and is just about automatic. So, if you need to walk from your bedroom to your living room, right, and you've done it many times, and the furniture hasn't been rearranged, and it's daylight, you can probably do that walk and talk on the phone or think about something at the same time without any noticeable impairment in either activity. And in that case, you would be truly multitasking. And so I think there's lots of times when we really do truly multitask, but then it's really easy for that to slip. And then what you're doing is task switching. So for instance, if you are driving in your car, and you are listening to the radio, right? And you're driving the car. If you're just listening to some music, there are probably moments when you are truly multitasking. Your ears are hearing the music, and your eyes are on the road, and your hands are on the controls, and you're doing all of that together, and you're able to do it effectively, and it's not too hard. But if it's really easy to enter things into the equation, then where it becomes task switching, like the traffic gets heavy and you have to really pay attention to what's going on around you in terms of traffic, or you're not listening to music on the radio, you're listening to a podcast, and so you're thinking about what's being said. And anybody who's experienced either talking on the phone or having a conversation with a friend who's in the car, or listening to a podcast, or listening to an audible, book being read, you know that there are times when your attention is so much on the content of the conversation or the podcast or the book, you're not really paying attention to what's going on with the traffic around you. I mean, we've all had that experience. If you're a driver, right? You've had that experience, and so in that case, then you were not really multitasking. You were task switching, and in some cases, you were not paying that much attention to one of the things or another. I mean, I know that sometimes when I'm listening to a podcast or listening to a book while I'm driving, I will actually have to turn off the audio. I'll just stop listening to the podcast or the book because I'm having to pay attention so much to the traffic around me that I'm losing the gist of the story. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
So so that easily happens. And so if you don't realize that easily happens, and you keep trying to do more than one thing at a time, you keep trying to, you're on a conference call, right? And you're listening to the conversation, but you're checking your email, or you're sending an email, or you're looking something up. Or maybe you are, watching a video, watching something on TV, or and you're texting with a friend. We just have to realize that a lot of the times when we think we are multitasking, we really are doing task switching. We're switching very quickly back and forth from one task to another. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, except that I think we underestimate how divided our attention is, and therefore a couple of things. One is how much we're losing in information coming in, because you miss information coming in on one of those channels, and also the switching back and forth. And we can talk about the research on this. The switching back and forth causes you to lose time. You waste time. There's a time cost to that switching, and the attention cost can actually increase stress. So it can make you, at the end of the day, if you've been doing this all day, you will be physically and mentally tired. So that, the research talks about that. So we can go into some of this research stuff if you want.
Just take your pick.
Let's see.
Or, I can also suggest one.
Yeah, go ahead. What do you want to talk about?
So I guess I want to start first, if you would, about how exactly does it make you less productive?
Okay.
Right? So what is it that is actually happening? So I'm working on something and I am switching tasks back and forth. Why does that slow me down?
Well, it's pretty mundane. It's just breaking it down into really small steps. So give me a very particular example. Let's use a particular example. What are the 2 tasks or 3 that you're doing at the same time, or trying to do at the same time?
I'm trying to, I guess, write an email and watch TV, I suppose.
Okay.
Does that work?
So you're trying to write an email and watch one of your favorite TV programs at the same time. And are you doing, I have a question before I answer this to you. Are you doing the watching and the emailing on the same monitor, or do we have 2 different screens?
Let's do 2 different screens.
All right, so you have your computer screen, whether that's a laptop or whatever, desktop, and then you have your TV screen a little also in view, right?
Sure.
Okay, So in order to do both those tasks, you're watching the TV show, right? So you've got your eyes on the TV show, and your mind is processing, your brain is processing the information about what you're watching. Let's say it's one of your favorite, crime dramas or something. And you're engaged with that, and you're paying attention, you're thinking about that, and then, a commercial comes on. Right? And so now it's like, well, you decide you want to do something else. So you let the commercial just kind of run, and then you're not really paying attention to it, let's say. And you switch your attention over to your email. Now, typically what happens is you don't finish your email and your show comes back on. So now the show comes back on, but I was looking at my email. So now I have to switch. I'm going to switch my vision over to the show, and I'm going to start to pay attention to the show. But I still haven't let go of my information processing in my brain on the email. So now I'm processing information from the show mentally, and I'm processing information from the email mentally. So now I've got a sharing going on.
What do you mean when you say sharing?
Well, I have part of my attention and my mental processing is watching. I'm going to get to the visual in a minute. Let's just skip the visual for the minute. Part of my attention and thinking is about the show and the characters and what he's saying. So I have to listen. I have auditory coming in, listening to what one of the actors is saying, and then I'm processing what they're saying about, Don found the gun, and so I'm processing that as part of the storyline, right? So my brain is working on the storyline, but at the same time, I didn't finish thinking about the email. So while I'm thinking about John, the police officer who found the gun, I'm also thinking about Susan, who I work with, and I have to get her that document. So now I have those two things are going on, and I'm very quickly switching from one, John and the policeman with the gun in the story, Susan needs a document for the email, and my brain is like going a little bit back and forth until probably what I'll do is I'll give up the email for a minute, right? So now I've turned my attention to John and the police and the gun. But now it's like, okay, wait a minute though. I forgot to tell her about blah, blah, blah about the document. So now I pause my thinking about the gun and I go back to my thinking about the document. Every time I make that, but now something happened interesting on the screen. So I stop with the email and I go back to the TV. Every time I switch my attention, either visually, like I'm looking at one screen versus I'm looking at the other, and or with my thought process, it's John, the policeman, and the gun. No, it's Susan and the document. Every time I switch from one to the other, it takes
That's what I was looking for right there.
Microsecond. Right there.
No, that was just
Sorry
fine.
it took me so long to get there.
It's all very good information.
Every time you do the visual switch or the mental switch, it's short, right? It's probably, half a second, a quarter of a second, but every time. So I go from the email to the screen, quarter of a second, screen, TV show to email, quarter of a second, back to the TV show, quarter of a second, back to the email, quarter of a second. And every time I do that, I lose a quarter of a second. Now that doesn't sound like much, but over the course of a day, the estimate is that you can lose 40% of your time switching. You can lose a lot of time with all that switching. So that's the time loss. Now, and then there's also just the quality of attention loss, okay? Because you're doing all of that switching. And every time I got to start thinking about the document again, I got to start thinking about the it's like I have to repeat that whole memory trace, Which document was this? Why were we doing this? What did I send her before? What didn't I send her before? I have to like restart that and go back through that again. So now I'm also losing time because I'm repeating. I'm having to have the same thought. Right? I had that thought once and I solved it. I decided, yes, I already did send her that one document. I only have to send her another. But I forget that I had that thought because I got distracted by the TV show. So then when I come back, I have to have that thought again. And having that thought might take 2 seconds. So now I think about the document once. I think about the document again. I think about the document again. And by the time I actually send you the document you need, I've thought about this 10, 20 times. And every time it took a second. So there's another 20 seconds that got lost just because I was repeating the same thought over and over. So does that make sense? That's where the loss in productivity comes. And then you compound that with,
Right.
as I mentioned before, you have stress, right? Because that switching back and forth actually creates stress in your body and your mind. A little bit of stress like that is okay, but if you're doing it all day long, that can be a lot. The other two things that happen is because of this switch in attention, you are more likely to make errors. So now when I sent you the document while I was watching the TV show, I actually sent you the wrong document because I wasn't paying enough attention. So now I have to go back and fix that. I have to now send another email, or maybe, how many times have you forgotten to attach the document, right? I send you an email about the document and then I don't attach it. So now I have to go back. I have to create another email. I have to say, oops, I forgot to attach the document, and I have to actually then attach it. So, I lost 10 seconds, 20 seconds in having to fix the error. So we have the cost of the error itself, like maybe that was really a bad error, like maybe I sent you a confidential document from another client. That was really bad, and now I've killed my reputation with you because you think I'm not reliable and I send out confidential documents that I'm not supposed to. That would be a very expensive error. Or maybe it's just a small error, like I gotta send another email correcting what I did. Either way, I have the cost of the error in time or other measures. So I have the whole thing takes me more time. I have the cost of errors. I have more stress, and I have
was just going to ask you,
possible problem.
What about being tired? So, because you get more fatigued too, right?
You do, and you're getting more fatigued because of the. I would lump that in with, that's just considered part of the stress. Yes, you do get more fatigued by this. And then there's one other problem too. The research is showing that if one of the tasks that you're doing has to do with learning new information, which is not in the example we just gave, right? Really. But let's say it is. Let's say that you're doing this multitasking instead of while you're watching TV, you're actually in a workshop and you're trying to listen to what the instructor is saying. But instead of listening to the instructor, you're trying to also send an email because someone, you're sitting in the workshop, but you got a notification that an email came in. The email came in, you read the email, you realize you got to get back to this person. So now you're switching between doing your email and listening to the workshop leader. What we now know is that in a learning situation, when you're trying to encode information for storage for long term, task switching like that messes with the encoding process. And you actually then don't code the information into memory. So it's particularly bad to be multitasking when you're trying to learn something.
That makes a lot of sense of why most college kids are not paying attention at all during lectures. That would never happen.
Of course, that doesn't happen when I teach college. I'm sure they're totally paying a total attention. No, it is. And it's, And that's really problematic because that's like, how do you get that back? And I know I've been, I remember in particular an experience when I was not in college, but just an adult. I was attending a workshop for how to use a particular prototyping tool. And it was a 3-day workshop.
Sounds
and it was
really
so
boring.
badly done. Because, well, it didn't have to be, it can be very fun to learn a prototyping tool, right? I mean, I want to learn how to use prototyping tools. But, we've had conversations, you and I, about instructional design, and I'm really picky, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a science to designing a workshop so that it is interesting and engaging and so that people don't get bored. And these people who were teaching this workshop knew nothing of that science. And it was really boring. Like they were going about it all wrong, and it was just, so it was hard to keep paying attention. And I started task switching. I checked my email, and that was such a mistake because then I was lost. Then I had missed, in their boring hour-long talk about something, there were actually some important pieces that I had not encoded in memory. And now
it's gone.
It's on to the next part, and I missed the first part, and the whole thing went downhill. And it was like a 3-day workshop, and I couldn't, it was hard to get back to,
I think
and it kept
I think a lot of
over
people
and
are more
over.
used to task switching than you are, but it's certainly.
I don't know. You say that. Why do you say that? That's actually a really interesting.
Oh, I think a lot. So I think a lot of people task switch all the time, in work and in play, and they task switch constantly, but they don't feel like, oh no, I've like totally like like they're not falling apart. They don't feel like they're just like, yeah.
I didn't say I fell apart.
You said that you insinuated that like the entire workshop was poisoned.
Well, but I couldn't stand that workshop anymore.
Okay.
I'm not even sure I stayed all 3 days. I think I eventually just gave up and left.
My point is that a lot of people task switch all the time, and they're like, I probably should have paid better attention, but they don't. Yeah. But if they ever wanted to actually stop and pay attention, they could, and they could get back into the swing. Now, whatever they were trying to do before would be gone. But
yes. Yeah. And all right, so there's a bunch of myths about multitasking. Oh, you know what I wanted to mention that I'll throw in here? We have we put together, I don't know if you remember this, and I'll put a link to this on the blog post. We have this great video where you can go test yourself.
Yeah.
Remember that?
That's fun.
We recreate some of the research on multitasking.
I believe it's free and on YouTube if people.
It's free and on YouTube. It takes, I think, about 20 minutes to do it. I mean, there's several tasks, so you can go test yourself, and I think it makes some things obvious. It's kind of an interesting thing to do. Anyway, people think that. So a very common thing I've heard, I don't know if you've heard this, is, oh, well, I'm better at multitasking than you are because I'm younger than you are, right? I mean, I wouldn't say that to you because you're actually younger than I am. But people think that young people can multitask efficiently, but old people can't. And that's actually not been proven to be true. That, the whole task switching issue is true for everyone. Now, it might certainly be true. It's possible that young people might like it more than older people, but I think it's probably more of an individual difference than it is necessarily an age difference. So I don't think it's a capability. I think it's a preference.
Can I ask you to go into some stuff before we? I feel like this is a good time to go over it. So. Yeah. Because we talked about, the truth is that everyone task switches all the time.
All the time.
And do we know
Everybody
why
does all the
that
time.
is?
Oh.
Or do we have any theories? Because I mean,
Well, I have a number of theories. I mean, first of all, biologically, physiologically, we're built for task switching.
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we have multiple senses that all operate at the same time.
It is a useful
right?
skill.
And it's very useful. I mean, because we see things while we hear things, while we have their sense of touch, while we have taste, while we have smell, and while we have movement, and while we have thinking. And
by the way,
so
for some reason, I just think that statement would have been better if you used whilst.
Is it whilst or whilst?
Whilst? Yeah.
WHILST, but I don't know how you pronounce
Whilst.
it. I think it's
Yeah.
whilst you. Anyway, we have these then I would sound like, I don't know. I'm from an 1800 novel or something. Our bodies are capable of taking in information in multiple channels at the same time and processing that information at the same time to some extent and thinking about things, and quickly switching. I mean, that's how we have evolved as animals, as organisms, and we're capable of doing it. And so, of course, we're going to do it. And most of the time, that's a very good thing, and it's very adaptive, and it's very helpful. And everybody does it. I love the, well, I don't love, I mean, I shake my head sometimes when I hear things like, back before technology, right? And back in the days of primitive peoples, we didn't have to multitask. And it's like, are you kidding? If you didn't have to multitask while out in the jungle, foraging for food and making sure to not get eaten by a wild animal or bitten by a snake. We weren't multitasking, Of course we were multitasking. I mean, maybe more than we are now. Now we're sitting in our little comfortable house, right, with probably not a lot of predators able to get us. I mean, yeah. So the idea that we multitask, that it's required, or that there's more opportunity for multitasking now than before, I just think that's.
But there are certainly there are more mental tasks we have to do that demand our attention.
I don't know if I'm not. You mean because we're modern technological people?
They didn't have TPS reports.
I'm not convinced of that.
Like when you were working in I don't know what the difference would be. But back in the day, a lot of what you had to focus on was more physical, tactile stuff that is very intuitive. If you're sewing, or if you're weaving, or if you're cooking, right? These are tasks you have to pay attention to, but they are very
they're more automatic.
They're more, I don't even want to say that, they're more intuitive. Our brains are really, so for example, our brains are really, really, really good at tasks, at performing actions physically, reading emotion. If I toss a little koosh ball towards you, with two hands, you can just catch the koosh ball and you can just do it. But if I tell you, hey, I want you to write like a dissertation on, I want a page,
or I want you to calculate
how to start an S corp rate, right?
Physics,
so that kind of stuff is hard work. I mean, obviously we talk forever about system 1, system 2.
That's true.
But I think in today's modern world, there's a lot more tasks that demand us to keep things in short-term memory and that are less intuitive. And I think
yes,
because of that, it's more, it's not that we're doing more multitasking, but when it comes to the difficult tasks, there are more opportunities to be distracted and to multitask betwixt different
Oh,
betwixt
not whilst, but
betwixt different
Yeah, I would agree with you.
things.
You're right. And we probably are doing more multitasking or more task switching with mental tasks than perhaps, physical tasks or doing a physical task while doing a mental task. There's a lot of, it's pure, I mean, it's amazing if you think about it, and not healthy, we know, you can sit in one spot barely moving for hours, right? And be very busy,
Right.
but it's all mental, right? So a lot of the work that a lot of us are doing is all mental. Yeah, I will agree with you on that. But let's not say that it's all modern and nobody in primitive
So the
times
next
used
the next part I wanted you to
Multitasking.
speak on was very much about the difference. Why do we task switch so much? And it's because it is a very enjoyable experience.
Well, that's really interesting because, we're talking, a lot of times when, especially when psychologists are talking about task switching and multitasking, they're talking about it as a negative thing, right? This is a bad thing. You're doing it too much. You're losing productivity. You're getting
Don't you
errors,
just wish you could
it's
focus
stressing you
on
out.
whatever task that you wanted to focus on instantly and forever? I feel like that's how people feel.
Well, yeah. I think there's definitely this idea that multitasking is bad, but and it's not, right? I mean, so first of all, we know that it's normal and adaptive and helps us live our life. I mean, that's the way we live. But secondly, yeah, you're right. Even with the negative pieces of it, and even when it's hard, we still tend to do it. And part of it is that it's enjoyable, and part of that has to do with something I think you first brought up to me, which is boring. It can be boring to do just one thing. So I think that's an interesting
you look at
point as
video
well.
games. Video games are, well, especially, it's nothing but task switching often. And people love video games. Right.
People love it, right? It's really fun. So, so I don't think, task switching is necessarily a horrible thing. And I'm not saying that everyone should try and eliminate it as much as possible. But on the other hand, I think you have to realize those costs I mentioned, right? Lost time and errors and stress and difficulty learning. And so I think if you want to make less errors, be more productive, and be less stressed and less tired, then you might want to think about when are the times that you are multitasking or task switching, and it would be better not to do it. So, do you just have to assume that your whole day, all day long, is going to be task switching, and that's just the way it is, and that's, whether it makes you lose time or errors or get stressed, too bad. That's just part of modern life. Or, it is fun and you should always enjoy it. And if you don't, then there's something wrong with you. I mean, I think that I think it's useful to understand why we do it and when it works and when it doesn't work and when we may want to focus on one task at a time instead. And I mean, you're never going to totally get rid of multitasking. So, even if I say, okay, I'm not going to, I'm just going to watch my TV program, I'm not going to do my email. But it doesn't mean that's all that goes on, right? I mean, you still could be thinking, or your friend could be in the room talking. I mean, there's still, likely some amount of task switching you're doing. But you can be more conscious about how you're spending your time and what you're trying to do in a particular moment, and set things up so where you can say, for the next half an hour or 10 minutes or 3 hours, I'm going to minimize the task.
What are the benefits of that? Like what is it that you can achieve if you're doing this kind of stuff then?
Well, it's the opposite of the problem. So if you have something really important that you want to work on and you want to make sure you don't make errors, then that's one of the benefits, right? It's like, look, I know I have to do this, and it's going to be, whatever this task is I have to do, it's relatively hard or complicated. It's going to require my attention, and I will make less errors if I focus on it. So therefore, I'm going to focus on it, and then I'll be able to get it done more quickly and with less errors. Or it might be a stress situation where I know if I try and do this while other things are going on, it's just going to make me feel tired. And therefore, in order to not get stressed and tired and fatigued, I'm not going to multitask while I'm doing this thing. And now, there's another thing that we haven't talked about yet that I think is possibly important, and that's the idea of flow. So do you know about flow?
I certainly do.
Okay, so the idea of flow is that you can get into a flow state when you're doing a particular thing. And in a flow state, you become very engrossed in what you're doing, and all your attention goes to that one thing. And in a flow state, typically, you don't pay attention to anything else. Or you may not be paying attention to what's going on around you. It's often an enjoyable feeling. You're really enjoying being that focused. You may lose sense of time. Not realize that so much time has gone by. So, if you want to be in a flow state, if you want to encourage that, you probably want to reduce the opportunity for multitasking, because the flow state is all about concentrated attention on one thing, and multitasking is the opposite of that. So the other thing I was going to say is one reason why you might want to set up a situation where you're not multitasking is so that you can enjoy the experience of what you're doing more, because you can go into a flow state and not be distracted, and then you're enjoying what you're doing.
And that makes lots of sense. But I think the fact that it's so funny because people will do what is enjoyable.
No, not always.
I think they will. I think when presented with a couple options, they like to do things that they enjoy. But people really like being in flow states, and they really like multitasking.
Yeah. So there's an inherent problem.
Well, I think the trick is not I don't think you have to do one or the other. I think what the trick,
what you can switch between flow state and task switching.
No, I know, but I do think I think the trick is to kind of switch what is like you can train yourself to be like, actually, I really like when I'm being productive in this one way.
Yeah.
I like to, I'm in a flow state. This is a passion of mine. And so you're being productive, but you're also like being productive in a way that you enjoy. The problem I think a lot of people have is they are trying to force themselves to be productive. And while that can work, it is not enjoyable. And I think you'll run into all sorts of trouble. If that's,
How do you think they're forcing themselves to be productive? What do you mean by that? What are they doing?
They are, procrastinators and I have never really gotten along.
Well, we're going to do another podcast on the research on
sure.
procrastination, which is also in the productivity
sure.
course that we
sure.
have. But yes,
But it's
okay.
basically,
But what?
In sum, it's basically that I need to get this done. And so instead of thinking about what's the best way to set up a situation where I will enjoy myself, I just have to I'm just going to wait until the
Slog
last
through
minute
it.
and then just buckle down and work really hard.
Yeah, I see. Rather than setting it up so that I can get it done while enjoying
That
getting it done.
yes. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, sometimes we don't have that luxury,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Of setting things up about setting up how we want to go about doing something. But yeah, I think that makes sense. Another thing that comes into this, and as we're talking about this, I got to tell you, having done course lessons and presentations recently about multitasking, and having done course stuff and presentations recently about the flow state, and having done a course recently and presentations about mindfulness, this conversation is the first time I've connected those three things.
How? Explain that.
It just well, okay, so this whole thing about flow state and multitasking, I hadn't thought about before until because you just asked me the question about, why wouldn't you want to multitask? And then I thought about the flow state. But then as what we were talking about task switching, I started thinking, I connected it with the whole idea of mindfulness. So, as you know, that's another topic that I talk about and think about, and we have a course on, which is, again, fascinating research about things that happen in your brain when you train your brain, or I call it retraining your brain, to be in the present moment, which is what mindfulness is about. And, but, really what you're doing when we know from the research that people, for instance, who go through mindfulness meditation training, really what you're doing when you do that is you learn how to focus your attention. And you learn how, when your attention wanders, so basically when you start thinking about something else, or when you become distracted by something else, whether it's something in your visual field or your hearing or a mental state or a thought or whatever, you learn how to bring yourself back to just awareness of the present moment. And the research shows that people who go through that training are able to focus more. They're able to keep focused attention on one thing, which should mean they're able to go into a flow state better, and they're probably able to stop multitasking better when they want to stop. And I just had never connected those three things. So there you go, Guthrie. Thank you for bringing that all together. But yeah, I mean, I if we're going to speak personally, I mean, I multitask a lot, like everybody in the world does. I task switch a lot. I think because of what I know about it, and because of the teaching I do, and because of what I know about the flow state and mindfulness meditation, I am very aware when I'm doing it. Like I perhaps am more aware than I used to be about the fact that it's like, well, there I am, I'm switching. There's a lot of task switching going on right now. So I'm sometimes aware of it. And then because I'm aware of it, sometimes I'll actually stop. I'll say, okay, wait. And I think you've You've heard me. Where I'll say, stop. I'm only going to do one thing at a time.
Yes, you definitely
right?
get overwhelmed.
I don't know that it's an overwhelmed. It's just an impatience with. I just don't. I don't want to do that much switching. I'm aware that I'm switching, and I don't want to do it, and I just kind of stop. But even in my, I try in my. We in the course on productivity, we talk about some of the research about habits, and I try in my day, not always successfully, to set up my workspace and set up my day, the plan of a particular day, to minimize task switching. Sometimes, if I know that there's one task I really want to get done, I will. And you do that too, I think, don't you?
Yes.
Engineer your environment, engineer your day. If I want to work on this one thing and I don't want to be task switching during that time.
Absolutely.
And I find that really helpful. I mean, I believe, maybe I'm wrong, I'm much more productive doing that.
Well, I think people really overestimate how productive
they are.
They are, and the time that is required to be a productive person. It just doesn't take a whole lot of actual time.
You mean there's a difference between the amount of time you spend on something versus the amount of productiveness you spent on that task?
It's like
yeah.
It just doesn't take a whole, if you actually think about when you're really operating at your full potential, it actually is not a whole lot of time and effort to really do that, to concentrate and to be really successful and to be really productive, but it's really, really hard to do. It's and so that's part of the problem, is that it's really, really difficult to stay with that level of productivity.
Stay on task.
Very, very hard.
So let's talk for a minute, since we're all about this combination of humans and technology. What are there things that you think one can do specifically with technology in one's life or work in order to either do task switching effectively or minimize task switching when you don't want to do it?
Well,
how can you use technology, or can you, or is technology just automatically a disaster and it's just going to make you task switch in a non-productive way?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, all the books about how you have to, turn off all of your devices forever, and you gotta turn off
notifications.
Disconnect. I mean, not even notifications, but you have to unplug.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
I don't particularly think. I mean, I think it depends from person to person. That may work for some people, or a lot of people even. But I don't think. How do I say this? Just because you've unplugged, I don't think that makes you a more or less productive person. I think that battle.
Interesting.
I think when you unplug, what you are saying is, I'm deciding to. It's like a lot of. There's a lot of things that people do that if you force them to do it, it doesn't work. But if they buy in, then of course it works. And so if you're the type of person who is worried about being more productive and will turn off all of your little devices and say to yourself, okay, this is now my time to be productive. I've turned off my phone, blah, blah, blah. I don't think it's the fact that you've turned off your phone that is making you productive. I think it is you saying, all right, I'm going to
do this now. So the turning off of the phone is kind of like just a signal to yourself.
Yes. Now, of course, I think it certainly helps that you are not distracted if there are notifications and stuff that are coming in. But I don't think it's like.
So I think it makes it
can make it easier if you're susceptible. But I think it's much more I don't want to say mind over matter, but like the okay, I'm gonna do this now. Sort of thought, like I'm going for it.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I do think it can make it easier, but I also know there are times when I didn't turn everything off. And I'm just not paying attention to it. Like the phone is ringing. Maybe I'm vaguely aware that the phone is ringing, but I'm not answering it because I'm focusing on something, or people are trying to talk to me, or there's emails coming in, and I'm just like ignoring everything around me. So I think I think it can make it easier. And I think you're right. It's an individual difference. And for some people, they may need to turn off technology, or to turn off all technologies except the one that they're focusing on, right, in order to focus. And they may need to do that, or they may want to do that. But I think it does make it easier. But I would agree with you. It's not. I don't think it's necessary. And I think certainly the whole idea of notifications on apps and stuff makes it is a pull on task switching. It definitely is. There's no doubt about it. If there's a buzz or something appears on your screen, or
you can't stop it. You can't stop your
from
head
looking and your arm from reaching out for the phone, and so.
But short of notifications,
okay.
I think there is truly there's that notifications are a real problem.
Yeah.
Notifications are a real problem. But short of that, for example, if you just if you're on your computer and you have your browser open, you've probably really forced the habit of, I open the browser, I go to my news, I check Facebook, I do this thing, I do that thing. Like the patterns that you take that distract you are already very ingrained.
Yeah.
And so when you by turning the electronics off, you're changing, you're breaking your habit. So there is value in that. But you can, I think you can, if you think smartly about your habits and about if you actually decide, okay, I'd like to be more productive, I think there are ways you can do that break the habit, that have nothing to do with the electronics
for instance,
themselves.
Can you give us a for instance?
Well, give me a yes, sure, but if what is one way that I'm like not being productive?
I don't know. You tell me.
You're trying to make me give a
well, I mean, I don't know what. I mean, I think this is an individual thing. So, what is something that you do with technology that makes you not productive?
Yeah. I mean, checking the news in a browser. Okay. Well, So what I do if I want to actually be productive is instead of having like all the tabs open, I just have, I minimize all the tabs and open one blank window.
There you go.
And then I just work in that blank window, right? And so the normal habit of I have my work tabs over here, and then over here are my check the news tabs, and I can easily click over. Well, I can just minimize it, and now I'm not tempted. And if I actually want to work, if I am intrinsically motivated to be productive, then that's very easy to do. But, you talk to people who are chronic procrastinators all the time, and you can lock them in a cell wall with nothing but like their book report to do.
Still not
and they will find a way to make piles of lint and
anything
right?
except do the book report.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly,
well,
right?
then that has to do So we can.
Right. So being productive, to me, is a two-step process, right? It's about thinking, okay, what's the best way to be productive? And then there's the mental will to actually do it. And I don't want to discount that. I don't want to say like, oh, your people are lazy. It is one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah.
It requires so much mental energy. It's very, very, very difficult. If you're able to do it, I mean, I only give credit because not to say that people who are procrastinators are like mentally weak. That's not it at all. It's just it really it's not fun, and it's really mentally exhausting.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think and like I said, we'll do another podcast on procrastination. But I do think that it is interesting what you're saying. I mean, some of the things that I love to do, like for instance, I compose music, right? I write music. You do too, and I love writing music. I mean, I really enjoy a lot about the process, but it is really hard, and I mean, it's not always fun, and when I'm in the middle of working on a particular song, I mean, it's just hard work. I mean, it's as hard as any of the work that I do, or harder, right? And I really have to, push myself to, not give up and to sit down and give this time,
Can I give a trick that I use?
Yeah, what?
So what I generally find is that any task you do that is mentally strenuous, that requires you to have like a lot of focus and not be distracted, it's actually a two-part process. The first part is the actual, I need the mental, focus to really be thinking right now. And the second part is all the ancillary stuff you need to do, which is, I got to make the file folders, and I got to make some documents, and I got to set this up, and I got to upload this thing. And so, and even in the process itself, right? Like, even if you're working on a blog post, right? I got to edit the words, and I got to do, the dumb kind of just like run-of-the-mill.
Tag it, and the HTML link and all that. Yeah.
And that's a huge part of it. And so what I've found is that what I try to do is when I'm feeling low energy and I'm going to work on it, I do all the ancillary stuff.
Right.
And then I just wait. And then I'm serious.
Yeah.
And if I am feeling that burst of inspiration where I actually want to be productive and I want to work on it, I open up whatever I'm doing, and it's just I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
And then I can just play. And because that's really what it is, it's play. And then I'll get burnt out and I'll stop. And then I'll I'll force myself to keep doing the ancillary work.
Right.
And so, because what's most important is just maximizing that I actually want to do this now.
Yeah.
And have fun.
It's interesting.
So
that's your tip.
But yeah, everything takes a lot of work and a lot of time. Things are not easy. Do you have any other brain research about multitasking?
No, this is
You
it.
wanted to
I don't know that that's everything, but I think that rounds us out.
Do you think this went pretty well?
I don't know. I was just checking my email, so I don't know. No. I'd love to hear from people about what their experience is about multitasking and task switching and all of this. So, Guthrie, if people want to reach us, how do they do that?
They can email us at info@theteamw.com.
Yep. And like I said, we'll post about the testing your own multitasking abilities. We'll post that when we post this podcast up at the blog. Guthrie, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks to you as well. And we will be back soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.